Hello, welcome to Secure the Continent on News Central Television. I am Gbenga Aborowa. This is the program where we bring you up to date with all the security happenings on the continent. But before we get into today's major topic, let me first bring you the security headlines around the continent. The International Criminal Court says Sudan's army chief vows cooperation in Darfur probe. The United Nations has called for ceasefire amid renewed fighting in northern Ethiopia. And South African unions protest against a rising cost of living. And in West Africa, abducted Catholic nuns in Nigeria regain freedom. Don't go anywhere, I will be right back. Today on Secure the Continent, our focus is on Ethiopia as Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and Tigray People's Liberation Front have accused each other of undermining efforts to peacefully resolve the brutal 21-month war in Africa's second most populous nation, Ethiopia. On Wednesday, that's yesterday, Ethiopia's Air Force announced that it had downed a plane carrying weapons for the Tigray People's Liberation Front, shattering a 5-month truce and dealing a blow to the peace efforts. We have more details for you in this package.
Fighting erupted in Ethiopia's Tigray region between the Ethiopian National Defense Forces and Tigrayan forces in November 2020. Almost 2 years later, the war has left a humanitarian crisis in its wake, leaving more than 500,000 people dead. More than 61,000 people have fled for Sudan, and more than 1 million people have been internally displaced. Nearly 100,000 refugees from Eritrea living in Tigray have been caught in the crossfire. The conflict has since spewed to the Amhara and Afar regions.
I am deeply shocked and saddened by the news of the resumption of hostilities in Ethiopia. Ethiopians, Tigrayans, Amharas, Oromos, Afars have already suffered too much. My strong appeal is for an immediate cessation of hostilities and for the resumption of peace talks between the government and the TPLF with, at the same time, the full guarantee of humanitarian access to people in need and the reestablishment of public services.
After more than a year of violent clashes, a humanitarian truce was signed with a ceasefire declared. For almost 5 months, were no major incidents of shellings from either party involved. However, the fragile peace was broken when on Wednesday, 24th August, the Ethiopian government accused Tigrayan forces of launching an attack against its soldiers. Ethiopia said this signaled an end to the ceasefire arrangement between the warring parties.
This proposal has got a three-pronged proposal. Firstly, it proposes for peace talks to happen within the coming weeks towards an agreed ceasefire. Secondly, it proposes to undertake an in-depth political dialogue between the parties, leading towards a settlement. And thirdly, it proposes for any other pending issues to be addressed through a national dialogue.
In counter-accusations from the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, TPLF, which controls the Tigrayan region, it said government forces fired the first salvo despite the ceasefire. The TPLF claimed that government forces were aided by Amhara soldiers and volunteer fighters in what is called an extensive offensive. Beyond the physical war, the TPLF and the government of Ethiopia are on a political collusion course. The once nationally dominant TPLF ruled Ethiopia for almost 3 decades, while others were on the sidelines. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who received the Nobel Peace Prize in October 2019 for finally bringing an end to the 20-year stalemate with Eritrea, was widely praised by the international communities for that feat. But barely a year later, he went to war in the northern part of Ethiopia, a move that has led to international condemnation. Ahmed established a committee to negotiate peace talks with the TPLF, but the involvement of the AU has caused some concerns on the part of the Tigrayan people. Tigray wants the restoration of its major services, but the Ethiopian government has refused to budge until the stamp is made on their agreement to settle and ceasefire, perhaps forever. Unfortunately, the war is not the only thing leading to a devastating humanitarian situation in Ethiopia. The overall humanitarian situation has significantly deteriorated in 2022, leading to increased humanitarian needs across the country due to ongoing conflicts and violence and climate shocks, such as prolonged drought. And now, what appears to be renewed hostilities. Many are asking just how much longer before Ethiopia is pushed over the edge.
Now, joining me this evening to discuss the situation in Ethiopia is Hailu Kebede, the head of the Foreign Affairs Department of Salsay, Weyane, Tigray. And I also have Teklai, Gebremicheal, a writer and editor at Tigray.com. He joins in live from Sundsvall in Sweden. One welcome to you, Teklai. Thanks for joining us. We expect Hailu to join us in the course of a conversation. Thank you very much, Teklai.
Pleasure.
Now, Teklai, around 5 a.m. on the 24th of August, that's yesterday, the 5-month ceasefire between the TPLF and Ethiopian governments ended as fighting erupted around Kobo, reigniting the 21-month conflict and dashing the hopes of initiating successful peace talks. What and who is to blame for this resumption of hostilities?
I think I should start with clarifying the nature of the ceasefire. It wasn't a signed ceasefire, as your reporting seemed to imply. So what happened was a couple of, I think 5 months ago, the regime in Addis Ababa concluded that it needed a bit of respite from the war because the country was on the brink of collapse. It was about to asunder. It was the war was very, very expensive to continue. So they needed a bit of a lull, a bit of a break from the conventional war. So what they did was they stopped the war, the conventional war, and they resorted to another form of warfare, which was that they encircled Tigray and blockaded it from every direction so that they could control what got in and what got out. And they imposed a very, very draconian limit on what got in and what got out. And there was serious famine in Tigray as a result because they wouldn't let in any thing in the form of aid. Although over the past maybe 2 or 3 months, they allowed a trickle of aid. So there wasn't a ceasefire agreed by both parties. What happened was the federal regime declared what it called a unilateral ceasefire.
Yeah, but in that, you didn't have like exchanges of gunfire, mortar fire, and all of that.
Yes.
But
that's right.
You say it wasn't a ceasefire. What's your reasoning behind saying it wasn't a ceasefire? Because the definition of a ceasefire means, you've stopped fighting each other. Is it because banking service has not? Is it because banking service has not been restored, and telecommunications?
That's right. It wasn't agreed upon by the parties. So what happened was the federal regime conditioned the delivery of aid, the trickling of aid. I think it was in average between 50 to 60 trucks per day. But the regime conditioned that on the other party stopping the war as well. And despite the TPLF or the Tigray government's protestations that aid and humanitarian assistance shouldn't be conditioned on military activity, the federal regime wouldn't budge, wouldn't accept that. And the international community accepted that, the conditioning of delivery of aid on the other party as well, stopping firing shot. Although, on the part of the Tigray government, there was an understanding that the government needed a bit of time to prepare, to reorganize, and to re-attack again, as it did yesterday. So with that background, what happened yesterday, I think New York Times and Reuters have reported on the exact nature of how the whole thing resumed. What happened was the federal government had moved its troops alongside the Tigray-Amhara border and alongside the Tigray and Afar border. And they tried to make some incursions in the morning at around 5 a.m., as you reported, indicated. Yeah. And the Tigray forces then reciprocated. So that is exactly what happened yesterday. Okay. But I just wanted to emphasize that it wasn't a ceasefire in the convention.
Yeah, and you've always said it in previous times that we've talked. You really didn't have any confidence in that ceasefire. I would like to bring in our second guest. Simon Tesfaye is the founder of the DW Foundation, and he joins us live to discuss this. Hi, good evening to you, Simon. Can you kindly unmute your mic, please? Yes. I still don't have your audio, and I guess our engineers will look at it. Can you speak again? Let me see if it's been rectified. We'll come back to you while we'll sort out the audio. And now, Teklai, let's just backtrack a bit, because for the sake of our viewers that are not familiar of the bigger picture, and we're just discussing the conflict, and they don't know how it started. What's the genesis of this 22-month-old conflict that has been raging in northern Ethiopia for quite some time with devastating humanitarian effects? How did it all start? Can you kindly unmute your mic, please? Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
All right. So I don't know how far back we should go, but I think a good starting point would be September of 2020. So what happened then was Ethiopia was, according to the constitution and according to the normal routine of elections, it was supposed to have had elections in September 2020. But the federal government used the excuse of the pandemic and unilaterally postponed elections. But the TPLF or the Tigray government thought that that was a ploy by the federal regime to cancel elections and to kind of consolidate its power. So they defied the federal decree to postpone elections and held their own regional elections. And the federal government thought that that was them defying its authority, and then it kind of severed any sort of ties with the federal government.
Yes.
It blocked aid, it cut off budgets and everything. And from there, it was always a matter of time before active war broke out, because they formally broke any sort of diplomatic connection, any sort of connection that any regional state and the federal state should have. On the 4th of November of 2020, the Tigray government took what they called a preemptive defensive strike, because the Ethiopian forces and the Eritrean forces had formed a pact. And they
but Addis Ababa, sorry to cut in here, Teklai. Addis Ababa will tell you that, the TPLF invaded an Ethiopian National Defense Forces garrison in Mekelle, and that's what started the war.
Yes, they would say that. They would say that. But the exact manner of how the whole thing developed has been intensively actually reported by the New York Times. And what happened was the Eritrean and the Ethiopian forces in unison were about to launch an attack against Tigray. And because the Tigray government had intelligence that this was about to happen, they took what they called a preemptive strike on the night of the 4th of November. And that's how the war broke out.
Thank you, Teklai. Let me bring in Simon. I hope we've been able to sort out the audio problems. Now, Simon, quite bad news about the way the situation has gone from yesterday. And a lot of people were hoping that, there's been talks, that there have been hopes for direct talks, and that it will finally bring some relief to the long-suffering people in Ethiopia, especially in the northern Tigray region. Now, Simon, looking at what the incident and what happened yesterday, do you think that this might just be a one-off disruption, or the fighting will be sustained?
Thank you for having me again. I think we had an audio problem earlier, but I think it's rectified now. So I think one thing to keep in mind is we keep forgetting the fact that this is a premeditated genocide against the Tigrayan people, and the Tigrayan people instinct to survive and fight against, right? They've been doing this for about 2 years now. and the Tigrayans have been resisting. And with that resistance, the capability of that genocide being committed has been deteriorating. So for the past they've been using the name of negotiations and peace to kind of ramp up their ability to fight back and finish the job that they started. So they were unable to do it in the first round. So this is a fully fledged war against innocent Tigrayans to eradicate them from survival. So I have zero doubt they're not going to stop until the Tigrayans are eradicated. So if your question is...
Did you see this coming, the breakdown in the truce? Was there troops movement? Was there intelligence that it could happen, or it just happened out of the blue?
Yes, 100%. We've been alert. I, in fact, myself tweeted 6 days prior to the war, stating that the mobilization of the ANDF is being seen in the Mahara region, and there is a full-fledged war coming, and we alerted the international community to act upon it. But what we're seeing is the international community is choosing politics over saving humanity. And this is a very, very, very sad trend that we're seeing across the world. Yes, we've seen it. We've been alerting, we've been calling for intervention and stopping the movements of these troops. They've been getting ready for months. They've been buying weapons. We've alerted when we got intelligence the fact that the Ethiopian government has purchased weapons, and we've alerted when there were mobilization of cargoes full of weapons that were coming from the port of Djibouti. We've been saying this, but the international community keeps ignoring it.
Yeah, in the same light, the government in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian Ministry of Defense, yesterday said a plane was shut down and that was carrying weapons for the TPLF. What do you make of that? And has there been any evidence presented to prove that the plane was indeed shot down or it had weapons that were headed for the TPLF? Because if one side is preparing for the war, the Ethiopian side has also come out to say, you know what, these guys are also rearming and preparing for a breakdown in hostilities. Resumption in hostilities, rather.
I mean, there are simple questions that we can ask to clarify this, right? When accusations come, they're just blunt accusations. And what we need to do, especially when journalists do their job, I think it should be asking questions in terms of what makes this a reality, right? And the simple question to ask is, where is this accusation coming from, right? Where is the plan? I mean, when they're talking about a plane landed or a plane was moving from a certain area to a certain, where did it take off from, right? We live in the 21st century where flights are monitored on a 24/7 basis. There's not a single flight that comes from A to B. There is a destination, and there's a place where
there's flight radar. You could even monitor on your phone flights from anywhere in the world.
Exactly. Yeah. And if the accuser is not presenting the fact that a plane started from A to B, that's just blunt accusation. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
They're not willing to tell us where the plane came from. They're not willing to tell us who the carrier of this plane is, what type of plane it is. It's just saying that a plane was flying to Meqala and we hit it. And even the fact that each and every source that they're using and they're putting out statements that conflict from one another. One is saying that we shot it down in Shararo, the other is saying we shot it down in Meqala.
So why do you think they did that, the Ethiopian Defense Ministry?
Propaganda. To cover up the fact that they're invading and trying to eradicate a given identity.
Okay, let me bring in Teklai. Thank you, Simon. Now, Teklai, on June the 14th, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed announced plans for a peace process, while Tigray's leadership published an open letter the same day saying it was willing to engage in talks. Now, we see that, it looks like these talks have been jettisoned. My question to you is that why weren't these talks fruitful? Why wasn't there more commitment? Because you had, the whole world was hoping for it.
All right. Before I answer that, can I say a few words about the aircraft that has been allegedly shut down? It was a bizarre story yesterday, according to the advisor of the Prime Minister. The original story was that the plane was shut down while it was in the middle of unloading weapons that it was trying to relay to Tigray, implying that the plane was in air and it was unloading. Now, I have spoken to some people who have some knowledge of in the aviation industry, so technically that's possible. A plane could actually offload weapons from air, so that's technically possible. But I really doubt that was what he was trying to say. I think it was a half-baked lie, and he didn't know what he was implying. But at any rate, the government changed the line a couple of hours later. They said that it wasn't actually within Tigray airspace. It was shot down while it was on the way to cross from Sudan airspace into Tigray airspace. So surely it can't have been unloading the weapons in Sudan's airspace. So the story, even the lie, doesn't add up. And also, they say that the plane or the aircraft is owned by Ethiopia's historical enemies, not one but multiple enemies. So apparently, it's owned by a couple of countries. I think the implication was maybe Egypt and other countries, but it was never made clear. And at any rate, they didn't provide anything in the way of evidence. So I think that was just something for laugh. I don't think there is anything serious to say about that. But in terms of your question about the peace,
yes.
What is happening with the peace is Abiy is saying that they should sit for peace talks before he could actually resume basic services. So by basic services, I mean basic services like internet and food and banking and electricity and other services that Tigray is constitutionally entitled to get from Ethiopia. So the federal regime's contention is that the TPLF and the Tigray government have to agree to sit for negotiations before Abiy could even think of resuming those services. And the Tigray government and general Tigrayans are arguing that the people should first get the basic services before they could actually go into negotiations. And that is the kind of the deadlock that is getting in the way of the negotiations. But at any rate, in the local media and in the local communications, the federal government has been making it clear that they are not really interested in negotiations, that they are biding their time to finish off the TPLF militarily. So the reason they have been floating the idea of peace and negotiation is to appease the international community, because Ethiopia is desperately in need of foreign aid and loan. And you have to say the right things in public in order to secure those things. But otherwise, there is no appetite for peace.
Now, do you think this present situation, this breakdown in the truce, will be sustained? And are we back to the way things were in the beginning of the war? Do you think this will be drawn out? Are we going to keep seeing fighting between the TPLF and government forces?
Well, I think in my observation, and I have been observing things very, very closely, full-fledged war was always a matter of time, because the Tigrayans their patience was wearing thin, because they were running out of other options. They have a duty to protect people, and people are starving because Tigray is blockaded. And the government has made it absolutely clear that it intends to sustain the blockade for as long as possible. So the reason actually the so-called ceasefire has held for as long as it has is because the Tigrayans didn't want to be accused of being kind of aggressive, being the aggressive force. So they were waiting for the international community to kind of develop some sort of sympathy and to understand the difficult situation that they have found themselves in. But in terms of the federal government, they have always known that there was no appetite for peace and that the war was always coming. So I think full-fledged war has always been a matter of time, and I don't see how it would now subside. I think it will continue.
Teklai, I'm happy you mentioned the international community. We saw an impassioned Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Gebremicheal, who happens to be Tigrayan himself. And he did say, it was like the world has failed Tigrayans, because you need to see the level of suffering and depredation there. Would you say the international community has failed the people of Tigray? Because there are two types of negotiations. You have the AU mediated talks, and there's also Kenya that is trying to play a role in there, but the government is now outgoing. Where would you say the problem lies when it comes to the will of the international community to really put an end to this war?
Well, that's not even up for debate. So I wouldn't want to belittle the suffering in Ukraine, because it's a huge humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, and I don't think it's fair to compare it to Tigray.
Yes.
But the suffering in Tigray, the dire situation in Tigray is by every measure, literally by every measure, worse than Ukraine. Tigray has been blockaded for 2 years. Tigray has been cut off from basic services, electricity, food, water, and just basic things that people need for their daily lives. So Tigray has been deprived of that for 2 years. And huge swath of Tigrayan territory has been under the occupation of not just local forces from Amhara and Ethiopia, but also Eritrean forces. Huge part of Western Tigray has been occupied by Eritrean forces, and the kind of crimes that have been unleashed against Tigrayans, and these are the crimes that have been documented not just by the UN, but by Ethiopia's own Human Rights Commission, are extremely, extremely horrendous. So by every measure, the suffering in Tigray is worse than in Ukraine, but the attention that Tigray has been getting doesn't even amount to a tiny, tiny fraction to the amount of attention that Ukraine has been getting. Now, I'm not trying to compare, I'm not trying to imply
to belittle the situation in Ukraine, yes.
I just want to give you a bit of context in terms of what Tedros meant when he openly pondered whether racism was at play. I think he was couching his language very, very diplomatically, but if he was a politician, I think he would have used a much, much stronger language, because it's absolutely clear that racism is at play.
Thank you. Simon, Teklai just mentioned Eritrea, and a lot of people don't understand the role of Ethiopia in this conflict, and that there's actually another international party that is involved. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed got his Nobel Peace Prize for, ironing out relations, smoothing out relations between Addis Ababa and Asmara, and it was celebrated around the world. Now, these two former mortal enemies now tagged him to invade Tigray. So make me understand, what's in it for the Eritrean government, and why are they joining forces with the Ethiopian National Defense Forces to attack Tigray? Did Tigray pick a fight with Eritrea at any point in time?
Not really. Tigray has always been welcoming to Eritrea and Eritreans. In fact, there's nowhere in the world that has hosted a lot of Eritrean refugees and welcomed and harbored and educated, fed than Tigray itself, right? So the question we need to ask, and I always try to underline this, any nation, individual, or a group of people that allies themselves with the tyrannical government of Eritrea, that has committed atrocities, that has colluded and collided with terrorist organizations, the likes of Al-Shabaab, to create havoc and create chaos in the Horn for the past 30-something years. If you have any relationship by any means with this kind of tyrannical group, by default, you are a terrorist. And that's what Abiy Ahmed did. And we need to keep in mind, right? The reason the Eritrean government and this animalistic force is trying to invade, murder, massacre innocent Tigrayan is for the very fact that the Tigrayans had made sure that this force stays in its place, has disallowed it from committing the crimes and atrocities that it has planned to commit across the Horn as well as Africa. There are documented evidence by the United Nations that the Eritrean government has aided and abided Al-Shabaab in multiple events to create chaos in the Horn. And the Tigrayans and the Tigrayan-led government at that time, which was EPRDF, had made sure this tyrannical group stayed in its corner and could not commit the atrocities that it planned. Now we have a group of people that are stationed in Arat Kilo that have colluded with this tyrannical government to invade and massacre and kill to the very people that has safe harbored victims of this terrorist organization that resides in Eritrea. That's the simple explanation.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. We'll go on a quick break, but before that, I would like to say thank you to Teklai Gebremicheal. We'll bring in other guests for the second half. In the second half, we have Nate B. Yifu and Nahum Kasei to discuss more of this issue. Thank you very much, Teklai, for your time, as always. You're watching.
Thank you very much.
You're watching Secure the Continent, News Central Television. We'll go on a quick break, and when we resume, we'll continue our conversation on the renewed hostilities. Yeah, the truce has been broken. The 5-month-old truce between the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Ethiopian National Government has been broken, and fighting resumed yesterday. What are the implications of this for peace in Ethiopia, and what solutions are we preferring? For more on this, join us in the second half of Secure the Continent. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. If you're just joining this Secure the Continent, we've been discussing the resumption of hostilities in Tigray, which has frustrated the months-long road to peace in that region. Now, joining me to discuss this in the second half, I have Nate B. Yifu, a political analyst who joins in from Alexandria, Virginia, in the United States of America. I also have Nahum Kasei, an activist. He joins in from Seattle in the United States of America. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you. And I would also like to say I do have Hailu Kebede. He joins us via telephone from the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. A warm welcome to you all, gentlemen.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Now, I'd like to start with Nate. Quite a lot has happened in the past 24 hours. You know, so many moving parts and in this never-ending conflict, it seems. So yesterday, the United Nations announced that the TPLF stole 12 fuel trucks from a World Food Programme warehouse in Mekelle, Ethiopia. These stocks of fuel will be used for humanitarian purposes, with distribution of food, fertilizers, and other emergency relief items. And it will definitely impact humanitarian operations. Why will the TPLF do that?
The TPLF actually has issued a response to that today, and they say that they did make a deal with WFP, and this has been a practice for a very long time, that usually humanitarian organizations do loan a certain amount of whatever they have stocked for so many reasons. So there was a deal basically between the government of Tigray and WFP. I do believe, however, that WFP does, not WFP as an organization, but WFP chief has a motive for this kind of really unethical and, to the large part, not truthful issuance of statements. He has a certain kind of cultish-like religious connection through personal cultish-like religious connection to Abiy Ahmed Ali. I don't want to get into that, but that's been published for a very long time. And he
but the true situation of things, what happened? What exactly happened? And because these are serious.
There was a fuel stored in Mekelle, which government of Tigray and WFP had agreed upon to use. And this time, the government of Tigray has used it. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Nate. I would like to bring in Hailu. Now, Hailu, the federal government in negotiations in the past has said it's unable to restore services in Tigray because it's unable to safely send engineers to the region, which is under TPLF control. What do you make of this? And in your opinion, what do you think? Do you think the previous negotiations and all this talks about, we can't restore services to, was there sincerity on the part of both parties?
Well, thank you for having me. I am not hearing what the other gentlemen are saying because I'm connecting to you with a phone. My take on this resumption of the hostilities, the conflict is, in fact, yes, there is now an active engagement in the battlefront, but from what is happening over the last 1 year, the war was there. Yes, active battles were there for the last 4 or 5 months, but the war was continuing in another means. Tigray was still besieged, blockaded, cut off from the outside world. Tigrayans were dying of starvation because there was no medication, because there is no banking, telecommunication, electricity. Tigrayans were cut off from the outside world. And the so-called humanitarian truce was just buying time and, selling to the diplomatic community what the Ethiopian government wants them to believe, This was not a real truce, or there was no political gesture, there was no willingness from the Ethiopian side, especially for resolving this issue peacefully. It was coerced from the outside or from the international community and the big, power in the UN and the other big countries. So, in this, the negotiators, especially the chief negotiator, the Horn of Africa representative for the African Union chairperson, former President Olusegun Obasanjo, failed miserably because he couldn't bring a roadmap to this peace resolution. He couldn't establish a team to do that. So it was a non-starter from the very beginning. This was just a trick from the Ethiopian side that it is for peace, that it was telling this idea of peaceful resolution to the international community to gain some kind of relief from the economic pressure and also the diplomatic pressure that it was countering back in December and January. So there was no willingness, especially from the Ethiopian side, to resolve this conflict, this war, peacefully. Because as part of this war, there is a national nation-building narrative conflict. And you look into the Ethiopian side and the Eritrean side, their very existence is based at the base of Tigray. For that reason, they have coordinated Your own country and your own government is coordinating with an archenemy of this country to annihilate an entire nation state, an entire regional state in the Ethiopian Federation. So, if this is not resolved, I think war will continue. I think the international community should press more. They should, pressure the Ethiopian government to come to its senses and resolve this issue peacefully. The international community has a lot of leverage. It should start by, forcing the former President Olusegun Obasanjo to resign from his post, and some other people should take that post and lead these negotiations.
Okay, we'll touch on that. Negotiations and the person of Nigeria's former President Olusegun Obasanjo, who's the African Union's head of mission to the negotiations between Tigray and the Ethiopian government. Now, I'd like to bring in Nahum. Nahum, Tigray has been struggling to cope with food shortages. The humanitarian situation has been described as the worst in the world by the United Nations, and also the World Health Organization's Secretary General has always talked about the dire situation of people and the conditions in which they live in Tigray. For the sake of our viewers, could you paint us a picture of what the humanitarian situation is in Tigray, and what will be the consequences of this renewed escalation of violence between both parties to the conflict?
Thank you. So what is happening in Tigray right now is that the people are basically starving, and when we say starving, people tend to take it as if, like, a lot of the people around the world are used to people in Africa starving in one way or another, but this is a different level that we're talking about. We have more than 8-9 million people besieged because of their interest and desire to be free and to have to exercise their own rights, whereas the government decided to go ahead and enclose the region and basically deprive the people from accessing their own money that they have in the bank, whatever resources they had, whatever investments they had, whatever farmed crops and any kind of resources they can use at their disposal have been cut off. And there's no communication, there are no phone lines, there are no internet, there's no internet service, no basic services. Basically, the people have been deemed into living in darkness, in complete darkness. It's really sad to see that happening in the 21st century, in which we consider the world to be coming together and alleviating those problems from every part of the world. But in fact, Tigrayans today are living in a very heinous way of living, which they cannot hope to have anything at the moment.
So now, the 5-month truce, did it bring about any respite? And how much change did it bring while there was a ceasefire?
So as far as the people of Tigray are concerned, as Tigrayans, the past 5 months, we've all counted and hoped on the world that peace would be coming into Tigray and the conflict would be solved in a peaceful resolution where we all can exercise some form of freedom in a way where we can eat and where we can keep on living our lives as they used to, not in the same form, way or shape in any way that it was before, because we've lost a lot. But the past 5 months, everybody was hopeful. Everybody in Tigray was hopeful and was really determined into looking into this peace coming up, even though we know the government intentionally put Tigray under siege. But at the same time, we hoped that the past would have taught everybody and all sides into accepting peace and into giving peace a chance. And quite frankly and honestly, not only because I am Tigrayan, but even as a decent human being, as a single human being, you can see that the people worked very hard from all corners. Everybody was trying to support each other. But in the past 5 months, the Ethiopian federal government just kept on continuing the siege, giving excuses, bringing up different excuses at different times and bringing up different preconditions in which the people should do this and that, which were very, very annoying, to be quite frank, because we hoped that peace will come. But now they have started and unleashed another wave of war, which for sure would mean that
there will be serious consequences, exactly, as a result of this renewed resumption of hostilities. Now, Tay, talking about efforts to stop this? Because the war can't happen in perpetuity. It has to come to an end someday. Tigray's leader, Gebremicheal, said the parties should meet in Nairobi in keeping up with the prominent role that Kenya has had in mediating efforts. And Tigray also favors the Kenyan approach. He's also alleged that the African Union's envoy to the Horn of Africa, former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo, is too close to Abiy Ahmed and Addis Ababa. Now, my question to you is, why does Tigray seem to favor the Kenyan mediation effort or mode and approach rather than the African Union type led by Nigeria's former president? And what other obstacles are there and conditions to holding direct talks that might lead to lasting peace?
Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Oh. Can you hear me now? I might have to repeat my question. Hello? Nate, can you hear me? Nate, can you hear me? Okay, I might have to direct that question to Nahum. Nahum, my question was, Tigray's leader, Gebremicheal, said, that the parties should meet in Nairobi. He favors the Kenyan approach, and he feels the African Union envoy to the Horn of Africa, Nigeria's former president, Olusegun Obasanjo, is too close to Addis Ababa. So the question is, what's the difference between both mediation efforts, and what other obstacles are there towards holding direct talks that might lead to lasting peace in Tigray?
So the first most important thing is intentions and desires of all sides within this conflict. That actually really matters. So we have, on the other hand, the Ethiopian federal government led by Abiy Ahmed, who's in Addis, who is interested in basically besieging Tigray and crushing Tigray at all costs, and who never had the intention of having peace or coming into the gray area where Tigrayans could live in peace and entertain peace. And with that, Olusegun Obasanjo was introduced as the mediator who was going to facilitate talks amongst the two sides. Well, it's nothing personal, or it's not an individual reservation that we Tigrayans have in general on Olusegun Obasanjo. The problem is that he seemed to have a personal attachment with Abiy Ahmed, and in some form, I don't know what the exact relations that they have might be, but he seems to have a resentment and favoritism towards Abiy Ahmed, and he has been going back and forth to Mekelle, the capital of Tigray, and meeting up with our prominent leaders and organizers and whatever we have on the ground. Basically, he did not have a roadmap to come up and give forward for the people to have hope and faith in him, and basically has been forwarding and asking Tigray to give more than it has, in which he requested that Tigray releases prisoners of war that were apprehended within Tigray, fighting within Tigray. And in good faith, the people of Tigray actually gave into that and tried to show the world that. But on the other hand, he was not able to deliver anything to our people. Our people are still starving. The blockade still continues. There's no food being delivered. There's no medicine being delivered. In fact, we had one of the most prominent hospitals in Tigray, which is the emblem of Tigray Hills facilities, Aidar Hospital in the capital Mekelle, shut down because of lack of fuel supply that we have in Mekelle. He was not able to deliver, basically, and he seemed to be biased. So it's nothing personal that we have against him. There is no reservation against him. And we don't actually want him to be out of the general talks. In general, what the people want to see is for him to work under the umbrella of other international organizations, and he can facilitate as a former head of state of another African brotherly state, Nigeria. So it's nothing that we have against him. It's just that we need results. We are desperate for results. We are desperate for peace. And we are working around the clock to deliver peace across Ethiopia in general. It's not only in Tigray, but the thing is we have 8-9 million people starving every day, and we have thousands of people dying as the clock runs. So he should deliver. He was not able to deliver. He doesn't have any clear roadmap. I'm not a politician. I'm a non-partisan. I have no political affiliation whatsoever. But the thing is, what I would like to see as a Tigrayan is, I would want to have food on my table. I would want to see my mother being able to feed my other brothers and sisters that I have in Tigray. He was not able to bring that. And how long has it been? It's been months, and we've been waiting on him. If he can't deliver, then he would have to step down and give the chance to somebody else. And our government basically has proposed Kenya, the former Kenyan president, and Uhuru Kenyatta, and we are just hopeful that he can deliver maybe. And we don't see any bias or any favoritism so far coming from him. But with Obasanjo, even though these are rumors, but we've heard them, and it's very discomforting as an individual Tigrayan. We need results like today, right now, because we are dying. We don't have time for people to go back and forth between Maqala and Addis with empty promises, with nothing to come for Tigrayans. And now there's war, there's a second wave of war unleashed over the people of Tigray. And if he was someone who can deliver peace, who can deliver food, medicine, and basic services into Tigray, he should have done it so. But he basically ran out of time, and we basically are desperate. We want to leave.
Time is definitely of the essence, because every second counts, and people suffering this immense humanitarian situation in Tigray. I really wish we had time to continue, but this is where we'll have to draw the curtains on today's show. I would like to say a very big thank you to all the guests that participated in today's edition. Nati B. Yufru, Nahum Salsay, Teklai, Gebremicheal, and also Hailu, Kebede, and Simon Ceasefire. Thank you very much for your time and contribution to the program.
Thank you.
Now, Ethiopia's partners can encourage wider reconciliation even as they lend support to the Tigray peace process and gradually re-engage with Addis Ababa on development matters. To provide further incentives for peace, donors should signal that they are willing to offer a larger recovery package if the federal government manages to reach a comprehensive peace deal with Tigray, as well as take measures that show a commitment to the inclusive politics needed to break Ethiopia's cycle of violence. Thank you very much for being a part of the program. I'm Gbenga Aborowa. See you next week and another edition of Secure the Continent. Bye-bye.